Hi, welcome everybody. I'd like to get started. So we have our coffee with the candidates tonight. My name is Zach Stope. I'll be the moderator tonight. We'll be calling each candidate up to speak. We try to limit everyone to about 3 minutes or so we can get to everybody. I know that some people have time constraints. They're trying to get to other places, so we'll let them go first. First, I'd like to have Sherry Downing from the Budget Committee. Make sure you're talking to the microphone, please.
Good evening. My name is Sherry Downing. Most of you probably already know me. I am also running for the Budget Committee again for a second term, so please vote for me for the Budget Committee and vote down Article 23. Thanks.
All right. Ginger Grant, please.
I'm Ginger Grant. I'm running for the 3-year term for Select Board. I got involved in this recently. I was helping a friend kind of get the word out about Northern Pass, and I started viewing some of the Select Board meetings and some of the other town meetings, and it really sparked my interest to help the town make some changes. There's not a lot of people that get involved, and I think we need more of the town to get involved. And I really think I could bring some good points to the table and, have a new face and help get more people involved in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Tasia Singha for Board of Selectmen, please.
Hi, good evening. Since my name is difficult to spell, I'm going to hold it here so that those in television land and those of you out there in the attendance can see it. So my name is Tasia Singha Shivalingam. I'm running as a write-in candidate for the 3-year Board of Selectmen position. And you'll often hear me say, serve people, not power. Well, what does that mean? It really means this. I'd like to work to put the decision-making power into the hands of those that are affected most by decisions. Sometimes people will say, well, but the Board of Selectmen is the governing body. They are the governing body, but they're not the sovereign power. The people are the sovereign power. It says so in our Constitution. So when the people make a decision, most decisions are made by the people. When the people make a decision, it's the duty of the Board of Selectmen to manage, administrate, and execute the will of the people, the decisions of the people. I'd like to also speak about taxes. We'd all like to keep Ashland great, make Ashland even more great. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we do it in a sustainable manner so that the people that live here today can enjoy the Ashland of tomorrow. I'd also like to speak about economic development. So economic development is very important. But when I say economic development, I'd like to move towards economic sustainability. I would like there to be prosperity and growth for the economy of the families that live here, not just the businesses that come from out of town, but the people that actually live here. Ashland is the heart of New Hampshire. It's the geographic center. It's the heart of New Hampshire. I would like, and I believe it is, but I'd like to keep it that way, I'd like to make Ashland a democratic heart of New Hampshire. I'd like to keep it a community-based heart of New Hampshire. And the heart of New Hampshire is the people of Ashland. So I appreciate your vote on Tuesday, March 13th. Tasia Singha Shivalingam, 3-year Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you. And then could we have Patricia Tucker, please?
Okay, I am Pat Tucker. It is with great pleasure that I ask for your vote for another term as your town clerk tax collector. A great number of voters know me. For those who do not, this is my story. I grew up in Ashland, graduated from Ashland High School, the same as my father and my children did. Have been married to Bob for 50 years, had 3 children. Our youngest daughter passed away a few years ago. Our oldest daughter is an educator, and our son is a commander in the United States Coast Guard. I have served my hometown, working at the town office since 1986. I would like to remind the seasoned residents of how things work in the office and enlighten those that are new to the governmental process that I am governed in both the town clerk and the tax collector's office by the state of New Hampshire RSAs and the administrative rules. My position, as well as offices such as cemetery trustees, library trustees, trustees of trust funds, budget committee, selectmen, conservation commission, heritage commission, and others, are governed by RSA and administrative rules. The state legislature makes these rules. I work for the people, our residents, and our taxpayers. I very much enjoy the work that I have been involved in the past years. I hope that I have been helpful to each of you in some way during my tenure in this office. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Michael Vogel, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Michael Vogel, and I'm a write-in candidate for the 2-year term on the Ashland Board of Selectmen. I had a whole paper drawn out and formal speech, but I think I'm just going to talk to you guys instead. I'm relatively new to this town. My family's history goes back at least 80 years. My wife's grandmother was born here. Her mom spent time here growing up, and that's the heritage my children are going to grow up with in this town. And that's a big part of why I come to you and ask for a chance to serve on the select board. I recently attended the last deliberative session. After that, I went back and reviewed some tapes and minutes of prior select board meetings. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know most of those people really well. I want to know them better, but what I saw and took away from it was a little bit of tension and discord. Government and governance doesn't have to be the most exciting thing, but it should be civil, it should be constructive, and I want to bring a chance to do just a little bit better, bring some new views, some new life and new blood to the board. I want to take an opportunity. I felt the calling to run for this position, and I want to take that opportunity to try and make sure that this place stays the safe hometown that it is today, and will be in 20 years when my kids are grown and they are talking to people and looking back on their memories of Ashland. You know, real quick, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to paraphrase John Adams. He said, "I must study warfare and politics so that my children," well, he said sons, but my children, I have a daughter as well, "may study mathematics and philosophy." I've had my time in uniform, been relieved of that post at somebody else's watch now. I ask you guys to let me try my hand at politics and represent the people of Ashland for 2 years. Write in Michael Vogel on the ballot for select board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Phyllis Rietzma, please.
I'm Phyllis Ritzma, and I moved to Ashland in the 80s. You probably all see me roaming the streets or volunteering somewhere. This is my first time in joining anything doing with Ashland politics. But I am glad to put my name on the ballot as I was asked by a few people for the supervisor of the checklists. And I will try to do my best. Thank you.
Thank you. And then is there anyone else who I missed or anyone who would like to announce their candidacy? It doesn't look like it. So everyone's feel free to mingle and ask any questions you may have of the candidates. Does anyone want to ask any question to any candidate that they want televised? You'll need to come up here so that they can hear you.
My name is Anthony Randall. I've been a lifelong resident of Ashland. I am 56 years old. My question to the candidates running for selectmen has to do with the rights-based ordinance. At the deliberative session, it was mentioned that there is potential if we adopt this that it is, number one, illegal, and number two, that there could be potential lawsuits for, I do believe, selectmen individually and the town. And I would like to get the selectmen's candidate, their view on that.
Does any candidate for selectman wish to answer that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Thank you for that question, Mr. Randall. First thing I want to say is that we have, I'm working with the Ashland Residents for a Rights-Based Ordinance, and we actually have an informational session on March 7th at 6:30, I believe it is, or no, it's 6 o'clock, 6 to 7 at 85 Levitt Hill. We're going to be actually specifically addressing the RBO. And it will also be helpful to have the representative from CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, who actually drafted the ordinance to be there. I believe that they will actually be able to answer even further beyond what I can. But nonetheless, I'm going to begin to answer your question. The rights-based ordinance is called a rights-based ordinance because it's actually it's relying on, it's making its argument on the constitutional rights within New Hampshire. So is it illegal? Well, it's definitely not statutory at this point. That's for sure, okay? My interpretation of it is that it's not illegal because it is based in the Constitution, and I believe the argument to be sound, that the rights exist there to support the rights-based ordinance. However, yes, it is not statutory. At this point in time, the Municipal and County Government Committee of the House of Representatives in New Hampshire is handling CACR 19, which is the Constitutional Amendment and Concurrent Resolution 19, which actually would potentially make there to be an amendment to the Bill of Rights of the New Hampshire Constitution that would sanction the RBOs. So, moving on to the possibility of a lawsuit. Having read the rights-based ordinance, and I encourage everybody to read the community rights-based ordinance because I would hope that people vote on it in an educated manner. But in there, it gives the potential for the town to vote to enforce it. It doesn't mandate enforcement. So if it were to pass on March 13th, and then if there was to be a potential breach of that ordinance, all right, the Board of Selectmen as a body, because the Board of Selectmen operates on a majority of its quorum, not on the opinions of any one individual, but that body would then decide whether or not they intend to enforce it. If they don't enforce it, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of it is there's not a lawsuit if it's not enforced, okay? Now, that's the best I think at this point that I can answer that question. I would encourage people to attend the March 7th meeting at 85 Levitt Hill from 6 to 7 to receive more information on that. Thank you.
Does any other candidate wish to speak to that?
Thank you again, Chief Randall. Now, I am very, very far from a lawyer. And I am, however, a believer in precedent. And just to tag on to what Mr. Shivalingam said and point out, there are 11 other communities in this state that have passed very, very similar legislation. Most recently and closest is Plymouth. I believe they passed theirs the day before our deliberative session. And I just want to point out, to date, there have not been any lawsuits filed in this area. Not that that couldn't happen, because obviously it could, but to date, precedent says it has not happened. Thank you very much.
And was there anyone else who wanted to speak to that? Doesn't look like. Did anyone have any additional questions they wanted to ask? You'll need to come up here.
I have a few questions, but the first one is just the three candidates that decided to run as a write-in. I guess I'd like to know is why they didn't sign up formally during that period.
If anyone would like to speak to that, feel free to come up.
I have no problem going first, ma'am. And quite frankly, I think my answer is the simplest. I was late to the scene. I got into the political arena, if you will, too late to be officially on the ballot. I have been thinking about it, reviewing things. It was really when I went to the deliberative session that was, as far as I understand, too late to be formally on the ballot, that I felt the strongest calling to get involved and really researched how to do it. So it's not for a lack of caring or for procrastination. I arrived on the scene too late and felt write-in was the best way for me to get out there. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak?
My reason is pretty much the same as Michael's. Like I said, I kind of got started in this just doing other community activities, and as I saw more and more, I realized this is something I could do. This is something that I'm interested in, and that's where I seek the help of Tejas Sinha for the process of it. I wasn't really sure how you go about it. So we were kind of just late in the game, and we sat down and talked about it kind of together, and we had both decided that this was something that we kind of were interested in doing.
And anyone else would like to speak to that?
Thank you. That's a really great question. So for me, it was a matter of I needed to know that the people, or that a meaningful plurality of the people wanted me to run. It really goes back to, and I'll just be brief about this, it really goes back to the fact that I resigned from the Board of Selectmen in January of this year due to what I felt was a mistreatment that reached the point that I could not actually fulfill my duties as a Board of Selectmen member. So when I resigned, I did not have, I questioned, since nobody came up to the meetings, to the Board of Selectmen meetings, to support me or to call, to call out the other selectmen that who I felt were treating me with mistreatment. Since there was no one that showed up, I had to ask myself, well, do the people really want me in that position? Again, the New Hampshire Constitution says that we serve at the consent of the people, okay? And when you're in an office like that, and you're not being treated well by the other officials, and the public is not showing up to stick up for you, so to speak, and to say this is not appropriate behavior, when I searched my conscience, I had to ask myself, perhaps the consent of the people has been withdrawn. So, therefore, and I could not fulfill my duty under that situation, so I resigned. I did not have an intent to actually run, but over the month or 5 or 6 weeks after that, I received resounding support from members in the community that actually encouraged me, many of whom came to me and personally apologized for having not shown up and held accountable other officials. And so based on that, I felt that my understanding of the situation was inaccurate, and I needed to show up and attempt to again serve the people. And believe you me, with a name like I have, Tejas Sinha Shivalingam, it's very difficult to run as a write-in candidate, right? And so you can know really that I'm running because I feel that the call of the people is to come back and serve them. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any additional questions?
I do have some follow-up. Again, Anthony Randall. I have two questions. One is for all the selectmen of that are running on the write-in candidates, how many of them support the RBO? And the second question is directly to Tasia Singer about running, because it almost sounded like you're going to run, but if you're the only one that wins on the write-in, then you're going to be in the same situation you were before. I need to know whether you're going to stay in there for the long haul, or is the same thing going to happen? You're just going to resign the position. And I can understand how tough it must be. I've been in those situations before, but you got to have the strength and the fortitude to just keep fighting the fight that you want to fight, and you got to be strong with it. Okay, so if
Would anyone like to answer that?
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer the question. So first, I'll address the rights-based ordinance. So as a citizen, as a voter, I do support the rights-based ordinance, the community rights-based ordinance. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the citizens group, Ashland Residents for a Rights-Based Ordinance. I plan to be in attendance at the March 7th meeting, and I'd be interested in speaking at length about that then, but I do support it. Yeah, so thank you. I like that question. The way that you can know, okay, is that the situation is different. Here's how. When I was elected last year, I was the only person on the ballot for 2 open positions. Most people in the town didn't know who I was, and essentially, I was kind of elected by default, you might say, you know, not to disrespect the voters or my position in running, but that certainly comes up. However, this time, again, I'm running as a write-in candidate. My name is very difficult to spell, Teja Singha Shivalingam, and I spoke to you about having the consent of the people, okay, in office. If I'm elected by a write-in position, or by a write-in campaign, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I have the mandate, the consent of the people, and I will remain there. Regarding strength, I will tell you, Mr. Randall, I exerted tremendous amount of strength of character, in my opinion, maintaining my composure and being diligent in speaking to my other former Board of Selectmen members in a respectful fashion and trying to move ahead with policy. So, thank you. I hope that that addresses your question.
Would anyone else like to speak to that? Go ahead.
I also support the RBO. I have spent hours, probably 20 some hours, in informational sessions with CELDEF about the RBO, being able to fully understand what it means, what other communities have gotten from it, and the possibilities of different routes it can take. I'm also a member of the Ashland Residents for a Rights-Based Ordinance, and I encourage you to come on the 7th to learn more about it.
And would anyone else like to speak to that?
Thank you, Chief Randall. I believe transparency in government is one of the keystones, and I'm not going to lie to anybody. I do support the RBO, Article 29. Chief, you know there's a sign for it in my yard. Anybody that drives past the school can see that. I will admit wholeheartedly, the first couple pages of it read a little rough. There's some language in there it's a little hard to get past. But if you dig past that, get into some of the deeper pages, 4, 5, 6, what it talks about and what I truly support is protecting the land, the air, and the water. I believe, look, some of that language is rough, but fundamentally, our ecosystems, our land, our air, and our water are for us and for the future, for our little kids, and that's what I support it for that reason, because I want to make sure that those things stay clean and available for the future. I like to look at, if anybody remembers the Dakota Access Pipeline, I don't know how anybody feels about the protesters and how they went about it, but right after the protesters left, there was an oil spill in the very water they were trying to protect. Was it all for naught? I don't know, but I don't want that to happen here. That's why I support Article 29. Thank you, everybody.
Is there anyone else that wanted to speak to that? Did anyone else have any questions?
This one's for Ginger, because in your opening statement, you said that you'd like to help the town make changes, and I just want to know what changes you're talking about.
Ginger, would you like to answer that?
So some of the changes that that I'm talking about are, I've noticed there's open positions in almost every committee in town, zoning board, budget committee. There's open positions, and the ones that are filled are almost by all the same people. There's a group of people that kind of run all of them, or participate in all of them, I should say. And I'd like to get more people involved, and getting the word out more, making it a more comfortable environment for people to be in, and where they feel like their thoughts matter and their opinions matter. I think it would be great to get more people involved. That's part of the change. Currently on the Board of Selectmen, there is only one person that has young children in the school district. I believe Harold's the only one that has young children. I think it's good to get more people with investment in the younger kids in this community involved. Each year, it's more and more kids entering into the kindergarten program. It went from 1 class to 2. I think that says a lot about the demographic in our town, that it's a lot of young families. And personally, I have a family member that owns a business here in town, and he wanted to put a skating rink in, and the Board of Selectmen took that option away from him. And although I would recuse myself on those questions, I would think it would be important for more discussion about that, more stuff for the kids to do in this town. I think that our taxes could be lower, and I'm sure there's ways we can work on getting our taxes lower, to be more affordable to live in this town.
Why did they let him build a skating rink?
He wanted to put a roller skating rink in his building. There was someone that wanted to put a roller skating rink in his building. He owns the old Packard Mill on Winter Street, and it was put in front of the town several times and just kind of bashed. Oh, you're going to sell candy. Oh, there's not enough parking. And I feel like they could have worked with him more to get something like that. Could you imagine if the kids could go roller skating after school instead of, I see them out playing basketball in the street without any hoop. It would be nice for kids to have more things to do in this town.
I want to talk about that a little bit.
I need a follow-up on that one, too.
All right, we'll just do one question at a time, and if anyone would like to ask a question, you'll need to come up and talk into the microphone, so everyone that's watching at home would be able to tell what's going on.
As anybody that knows me, lives in town, I've been here. I'm also a licensed land surveyor. I deal with planning boards, zoning boards. If I remember correctly, from when the rolling skating rink was going to go in, I don't think the selectmen had anything to do with it. It was all that it didn't make it through the planning process. And the planning board, and possibly maybe the zoning board to get a special exception or something. But please don't bring the selectmen into that, because I really truly believe they did not have a part of it. Because we have a process in place right now to protect our quality of life, our water, and all that. It's called zoning regulations, which is what the town adopts. And maybe what happens is if we adopt the rights-based ordinance, then we could do away with the zoning ordinances, because it sounds like that protects the water, air, and everything that we're looking to protect. Because I'm not a man that likes a lot of regulation. I call certain amounts of regulation is like fertilizer. I call it the fertilizer theory. 5 pounds of fertilizer, if it's good for your garden, well, don't throw 10 pounds on, because it's not going to make it twice as good. And the same thing with regulation. If you use a minimal amount of regulations to accomplish what you need, then it works better than some of these towns that I deal with that have regulations and the books are this thick. So, but to your question, I don't think the selectmen had anything to do with that. I think it was just the planning board and possibly zoning board if they needed to do that. Okay? So that was my question on that. So, okay.
Did anyone else have any additional questions, or did we fully answer that one? Okay, great. Does anyone else have any additional? Okay.
Teacher Singer, I watched a video this afternoon, and you had stated that the Budget Committee should have more participation in the government, and I just wanted to know if you could expound on that, in what way?
Would you like to answer that?
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I was minorly distracted because my son was kind of crying. So I understand the question to be on my video on Pemmy Baker Television that was recently put up in support of my campaign. I mentioned that the Budget Committee, as an example of having more kind of sharing power with other public bodies, and one of them was the Budget Committee. And so you're asking, as an example, what would that look like? Is that the...
How you said that the Budget Committee should have more participation in the government.
Okay.
I just wanted to expound on that, what you meant by that.
Okay, sure. Well, Oh, yes. Okay, so Mrs. Tucker says that in my video I said that the Ashland Budget Committee should have more participation in the government. First of all, I'd have to look at the video to know my exact quote, so I'm not admitting that that's my exact quote. However, I will say this, an example of what I was really getting at in that situation, I believe that was in the context of decentralizing power, kind of taking power from the Board of Selectmen and dispersing it to other bodies. Specifically, one thought that comes to my mind that is pertinent at this moment is the warrant article to delegate the default budget to the Budget Committee. I personally would like to see that happen. I think that is one way that we can take one decision-making piece and move it over to a different public body. Thank you.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions?
This question is for all the selectmen. What drew you to the town of Ashland to want to be in the town of Ashland to live here?
Would anyone like to answer that?
I came to Ashland about 5 years ago. I was living in Nashua. I had just had a baby, and it wasn't really where I wanted to raise my child. At the time, I was working for my uncle, John Grant, who owns Alpaco here in Ashland. He also owns one in Westford, Massachusetts. I was working at that facility. He offered for me to move up here, where it's cheaper to live and it's a little bit better place to raise a child. And I jumped on the idea. I was up here 2 weeks later, and I plan on living here the rest of my life, really. I love this town. I have since stopped working for my uncle, and I own my own business. And it's in this area. I plan on staying in this area. This is kind of a central location for me, for my business. So that's really what originally drew me here. And the longer I'm here, the more I like it. It's small town, but there's plenty of stuff to do. You can get to the ocean, you can get to the mountains. It's, I love the little small town grocery store and the small class sizes at the school. That's really what's drawn me here and kept me here.
Does anyone else wish to answer the question? Go ahead.
So what drew me to Ashland? So before my wife and I got married, she actually owned property in Ashland. So at the time that we got married, she owned property. She's owned property here, I think, since 2009 when she moved here. Funny story, we were moving back east from living out in the West. We lived in California and Arizona, and we were living briefly with my in-laws, and I said, it's time to go to New Hampshire. But I'm very happy to be here in New Hampshire. I have ancestry going back to the Revolutionary War. One of my Patriot ancestors actually was a private in the Continental Army, and he served out of New Hampshire. And several generations of my family after him lived and raised their children here in New Hampshire. So I'm actually, in that way, I feel connected with New Hampshire. I'm very pleased to be here in Ashland. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak to that?
My choice to be here in Ashland isn't the most colorful story, but it does relate back to family. Not going to get into the details. My wife's father is very sick, and we chose to leave Oklahoma and come back to New Hampshire. She was raised in Guilford, and we started looking around. What's affordable? What's safe? What has a good education system? What's close to family? Ashland checked those blocks. I can leave my keys in the car and it's going to be there in the morning. That's not where I lived in Oklahoma. My children can safely walk to school. That's not where I lived in Oklahoma. And we are very close to my mother-in-law, and we are in a very short driving distance to my father-in-law. And my family back home was not very involved. So for family and those practical reasons of safety and happiness, we were drawn here. And it worked out, and it feels like a very good fit. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to answer the question?
I'd like to ask another question.
All right, so feel free to come up here and ask your additional question.
Anthony Randall again. It was mentioned that and I think you said this, Ginger, that you want to cut the taxes. Okay. I'm going to tell you, I am the chief of police. I run my department. It's very tough as it is. I'm going to tell you that the municipal part of our budgets is about as trimmed as you can trim. Okay. For some reason, everybody goes after the municipal part of the budget and nobody says anything about the educational part. I would like to know from you, how are we going to lower the taxes in the town of Ashland?
Does anyone wish to speak to that?
Can I follow up with a question that she can answer along with that?
Yeah, sure.
Just for your knowledge, it would take a budget cut of $268,000 to lower the tax rate $1. So, to go along with how you would do that.
All right, and would anyone like to answer that?
Very valid point. And you said it's a very, trim budget as it is. That's an opinion. There's money in different areas, and things could be shifted around a little bit. I haven't really sat down with all of the information in front of me to be able to tell you exactly where I would cut it, but I know that there's a little leeway in a few places, and it would take a lot of research and a lot of time to really plan it out. But I feel like we shouldn't have such high taxes. All the surrounding towns are a lot cheaper than Ashland. So what are they doing that we could do? And like I said, it would take some research, but it's a goal of mine to get it to be more affordable for people to buy here.
Would anyone else like to speak to that question? All right. If no one else would like to speak to that, sure. Feel free.
It's very difficult to compare towns to towns, because if you look at Ashland by land area is the smallest town around, okay? As a chief of police, I go to the chief of police in Holderness because we have basically the same size departments, because when I do up my budget, I go, wow, that's a lot of money to have the police protection that we have. And Mr. Vogel even said it's a safe place to be. So I think the police department must be doing a good job, I guess. I'm going to take that as a compliment and thank you very much. And so I consult with him, but you have to be very careful when you start comparing stuff. We've put a lot of the town of Ashland into conservation trusts, which removes taxable properties. So now the rest of us have to come up with that money to maintain the protection and the services that we have in town. All these other towns have more taxable properties. They're bigger towns. They have more lakefront. There's a lot of factors that factor into the tax rate. And I think you're going to find that when you really delve into it, because I'm going to tell you, I put together my budget, but you have to have some contingencies in your budget for shortfalls or stuff that mysteriously comes up, trucks breaking, vehicles going down. So my follow-up to that is you need to be very careful when you research that to make sure that you compare apples to apples. Because I've had people in the past come to me and say, I've compared your budget to this town, and this town. Well, I'm going to tell you, you can compare my budget to theirs, but make sure you got all the same stuff. Because some towns do not have their health care in their department's budget. It's in the town budget. And that's huge in my department. So that's what drives some of the cost up at the police department. So just be very careful about what you research and make sure you get real good numbers to compare to. It's very tough because Ashland is kind of unique in its own right. And I know that because I've lived here my whole life. So it is kind of crazy.
Does anyone else, did you want to speak to that?
Like you said, it would take a lot of research, and that's something I'm willing to do. I'm also willing to have, respectful conversation with everybody involved so we can come to terms. My goal is to be kind to people and listen to their opinions and listen to what they have to say and, look at all the parts of it together respectfully. And, it might not be something that happens overnight, of course, but in the long run, that would be the goal. It's obviously, it wouldn't even probably happen in my term, but if I were to be elected, but something set in place to kind of get things looked at and maybe see what little tweaks could be made to make a few changes that in the long run end up being more sustainable.
Did anyone else have any additional questions? All right, well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for all the candidates, and everyone have a great rest of your night.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.